Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 albums by Irish rock titans U2. U2 formed in Dublin in Ireland in 1976. Singer Bono, guitarist The Edge, bass player Adam Clayton, the only one who's from England, and Larry Mullen on drums. They were very much a sort of from the post-punk stable. They were influenced by bands like The Clash and The Jam and the Sex Pistols and Patti Smith, and they played a lot of schools and clubs around Ireland before meeting Paul McGuinness in 1978, who immediately took the band on to manage them. And there was no looking back after that. Within 2 years they had a deal with Island Records, and they went on to make 14 albums. Studio albums, and I think the best of which, along with their sort of extravagant live show, helped them become unquestionably the biggest band in the world for at least a decade and very possibly longer. I think the more popular they got, the more their sound evolved from that original post-punky noise to a sound that really was very sweeping and large, and really went to kind of epitomise stadium rock for many years. I've talked about Bono before in the Frontman show, but I think the real secret weapon in U2 is The Edge, who had this kind of revolutionary guitar style in the way he employed delay pedals, and it's now very much his kind of signature sound. You hear that sound and you immediately think of U2. I don't love U2, I've said this before, but I do admire them, and I do quite like a lot of their songs, and a couple of albums I love. But I do have all their albums because I'm a little bit OCD like that with music. I'm sure some of you are as well. I've said before, I think they're a band that are innately a force for good, despite making the odd big mistake along the way, of which we'll talk a little bit about at the end. And I think they've carried themselves very, very admirably, considering the muck and grime that you can throw at most other rock bands of their stature. But let's talk about the music and get going. So at number 10, I'm going to put from 1997 their ninth album, Pop. Now, Pop famously had to be submitted to the record company early and unfinished because they had a huge Pop Mart tour booked and they had to get on the road. And they're said to be very, very unhappy with it in parts. I mean, I like it because I think it's the last time you hear U2 being innovative and interesting. There's trip hop on here, there's electro funk, techno. Some of it works better than others, undoubtedly, but I think the introduction of producers like Howie B and Nelly Hooper adds an urgency missing from the more subdued Zeropa that preceded it, but also interesting experimentation, which I think is almost entirely lacking from all the albums after this one. Staring at the Sun wasn't too bad a single. I loved Disco. I thought that was a great single, and actually one of my favourite U2 singles to this day. The band, like I said, they're not fans of the album themselves, but it does have its moments, undoubtedly. At number 9, their second album from 1981, October. This is a kind of earnest, quite pious album. It's a bit of a crossroads album because you get the feeling that the band are not quite sure what they want to be. It didn't help that Bono had lost his briefcase full of lyrics that he was going to have for this album. So the recording sessions were quite chaotic, quite mad. They had to do a lot in a short space of time. But I'm not sure if they knew if they wanted to be sort of worthy Christian rockers or new wave punk pioneers with this record. I think Gloria is pretty much the best and most famous thing on this record. And with regards to the sound, it's produced by Steve Lillywhite. It's claustrophobic and tight, and there isn't a lot of space in there. And I do like a lot of space in my records. It didn't sell that well and did soon drop out of the charts due to lack of a single. But as an early curio in the U2 back catalogue, it's a fascinating listen. At number 8, from 1988, their sixth album, Rattle and Hum. This was the soundtrack to the movie of the tour that had taken them to the largest arenas across America following the success of the Joshua Tree. And really, it's the band discovering roots music, especially the blues. B.B. King features on here, and Bob Dylan features on here. Both of them are guests. It's a long, patchy record, but it does have some really good singles on it, some great moments. You've got Desire, which was their first UK #1. When Love Comes to Town, which featured B.B. King. Angel of Harlem, which is good fun. It's an ambitious record, and it possibly reaches too far. I mean, and there is mush on here. You've got real average pub standard covers of things like All Along the Watchtower, and what's the other one? There's the other cover on here. Helter Skelter. Sorry, yeah, there we go again. I am losing my mind, definitely. But you know what? The film is great. And the album itself is a bit like a long old journey. You can just stop at nice songs and just amble by sort of little vignettes and things. It's I think perhaps I'm placing it higher than it deserves, because I really did like the film. But this album does have a lot of detractors to it. At number 7 from 1980, their debut album, Boy. This has so many of the likeable tropes that debut albums have. It's punky and it's creaky, and you can hear where the songs are almost held together by sticky tape. But it has youthful enthusiasm and charming naivety on the songwriting. Take a song like I Will Follow, which is pretty much just like a 2-note song. But it works because of the performances, and it works because of that huge voice of Bono's, which gives gravitas to even sort of the thinnest songwriting. I think this album, Boy, is well titled because this is the sound of 4 boys making music. It's produced by Steve Lillywhite, and you can hear a lot of his classic production tropes straight out of the box on here, making this, I think a very, very enjoyable debut album to listen to. At number 6 from 2000, their 10th album, All That You Can't Leave Behind. So after the sort of half-baked but enjoyable debacle that was Pop that we talked about a while ago, U2's stock had fallen. That album had not sold that many records. And, with Coldplay on the horizon, I think the band really felt a need and a desire to reclaim their place as the world's biggest band. And this, I think when you look at U2's history, this really is the album where they stopped looking forward and trying to innovate and be different, and they started really looking backwards on their own history and legacy and borrowing from that. It sounds like a U2 album, but it sounds like a U2 album with an agenda, a particular agenda, and that is to reclaim our title as the biggest band in the world. You've got some mega hit songs on here. Beautiful Day, Elevation, Walk On. These are big tunes designed to sell records, and I think it's all the more enjoyable for it. Actually, it's far less pretentious than a lot of other U2 records, and it did win 7 Grammy Awards and got to 280 on Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time. So clearly, the public were very, very happy to have that old-sounding U2 back as well. And number 5 from 1983, their third album, War. So earlier I was talking about how Boy was a very aptly titled debut album. Well, this is the album really where I think they became men, and War is a very appropriate title too. It's definitely the album that brought them to the attention of the public, thanks to 2 big songs. And it's also the album where they started finding their sort of cause célèbre. Bono started waving a white flag on stage in the name of peace amid troubles in Ireland, and the whole vibe is far more political. Songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday and New Year's Day speak for themselves, and it's those songs that help propel this album to number 1 in the UK. There's not just an energy on War, though. There's an anger on this record, and a growing maturity, and certainly those are things I think which were missing from October, the album that just preceded this one. But number 5 from 1993, their 8th album, Zooropa. So, encouraged by the success of Achtung Baby, they seem to take it further on Zooropa, which is a kind of strange oddity in the U2 catalogue. It's an odd, fascinating but alluring record, I think. It's full of quirks. It was produced by Flood and The Edge and Brian Eno. and it's driven by themes of technology and media. And you've got songs like Numb, Zeropa, and Lemon, and they're all intriguing experiments. Some songs on this album work better than others, unquestionably, but it's never boring, I don't think. Even ends with Johnny Cash popping up, doing a guest appearance on a song called The Wanderer. I've got very, very fond memories of this record because I saw the tour 2 nights in Wembley Stadium, from where I got this lovely T-shirt. So again, it might be a record I'm placing a little bit too high because I remember it with great affection, but actually I'm not sure. I do think this is a real hidden gem in the U2 catalogue. It won a Grammy, it sold 7 million copies, which is a bit disappointing if you think you're the biggest band in the world, as much, as I'd be thrilled to sell 7 million copies of anything. And I think the album kind of works best when you regard it as a bit of a B-side to Achtung Baby's A-side, maybe in the same way that The Joshua Tree is the A-side to the Unforgettable's B-side. Does that make sense? I don't know. But number 3, their 4th album from 1984, The Unforgettable Fire. This, I think, is the album where really it all started coming together for U2. The songs were no longer short, punky sketches, but they were real songs here. Pride, Bad, The Unforgettable Fire. But the real thing that took it onto the next level here is the ambient, atmospheric sort of soundscape. That's what really resonates, and that was brought in by Brian Eno, of course, famously, who'd worked with Bowie and was in Roxy Music, and Daniel Lanois, producer extraordinaire. It's said that Chris Blackwell, the head of Isla Records, was really not happy with them coming in because he felt the band was just on the verge of its massive step up to the big time and they were about to get bogged down in a load of avant-garde nonsense. But actually, I think that the producers really, really capture the sweet spot between Bono's voice and the Edge's now subtler, more cleverer use of delay. I think the Edge really comes into his own on this album because this is the album where, with his guitar, he's able to start expressing depth and passion and emotion, just with his very, very clever use of sonic soundscapes. He's very, very intelligent guitar player, maybe not the most technically gifted, but incredibly influential and actually still, I think, some way ahead of the people he's influenced in his wake, which is not something you can say that often. Pride was the first top 40 hit for the band in the States, and I think this is where, along with the Live Aid performance that came a year after this, where this was the start of the band's canonization as kind of the saintly Christian do-gooders of rock and roll. Number 2, their 7th album from 1993, Achtung Baby. So, Rattle and Hum had artistically been received inconsistently, is a polite way to say it. And I think artistically, the band themselves regarded it as something of a backward step and a letdown. And a lot of people were thinking that U2 had kind of shot their bolt and were a bit of a one-trick pony now and washed up. And I think the band felt a real need to go into the studio and shake it up and come out with something different. Particularly because arena rock at this point was really becoming out of fashion, and it was grunge that was now really seeping in to the rock and roll woodwork. So in comes Brian Eno, as we talked about earlier. Now, Brian Eno brought with him his oblique strategies. You may not know this, but Brian Eno created a list of cards. On each of these cards was a strategy that you should use when you find yourself hitting a brick wall in the studio. And I actually have Brian Eno's oblique strategies right here, very kindly given to me by one of my dear friends. And they're very interesting. They say things like, remember those quiet evenings. Go outside, shut the door. Do something boring. Retrace your steps. Ask your body. Make it more sensual. So these are all things I employ when I'm making records. I don't know if I do, actually, but they're a good read. But you can just imagine the 4 guys in U2 sitting around reading theirs. Make it more sensual, Bono. Make it more sensual. Go outside, Edge. Go outside. Who knows if, they followed these cards to the letter. But they are a very good way of just mixing it up when you're working in the studio a little bit. I think, the result though was a new sound and a new energy. It's an abrasive, dark, jumpy record. It's got that Eastern European flavour, and it's very much kind of Bowie's trilogy of albums all in one. Famously, they were a bit slow to get going on this album. They just couldn't sort of find their way into it, and then they all kind of jammed one out of on the spot, and that sort of built into this sort of epic U2 song, which is probably to this day their most popular song. 5 songs from this album was released as singles, and all of them charted. There's The Fly, and Mysterious Ways, Even Better Than the Real Thing, and of course One Itself. So I think there's a real consistency of songwriting on here that they never really achieved again. The album sold about 18 million copies, and it won a Grammy for Best Rock Performance. But that takes us to our number 1 U2 album, which is, I'm kind of a bit sorry to say, because I tried very hard to not put it at number 1, but a Colossus is a Colossus, and it's, of course, the Joshua Tree from 1987. This really is the fruition of all that promising work you hear on Unforgettable Fire. It's Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno again, and it really is one of those albums where everything comes together. Sound, songs, imagery, timing, anticipation, and delivery. It's an album that absolutely encapsulates and defines the period in which it was released in rock history as good as any. And the album is based around a kind of love-hate relationship with America. They were very, very critical of American foreign policy and things like that. But at the same time, the band was discovering American roots music and falling in love with the country and its landscape and its heritage. By now, the band had really had sort of perfected the stadium rock arrangement in songs. But there's still something very, very affecting and personal about the music here, and that's a very, very clever thing to do with songs that need to fill arenas that big. I think that has an awful lot to do with the Edge's touch and the development his playing that I was talking about earlier. Where the Streets Have No Name, with that beautiful moment in concert when it just all goes that scarlet red color, and you can hear that the Edge's guitar coming in. I always get goosebumps to this day when I see that on TV. With or Without You, Running to Stand Still, Red Hill Mining Town, In God's Country, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. These are all absolute epic rock classics, but all of them would leave a huge hole in this record if they weren't there. Every song on this record is doing a job in creating that enormous sweeping soundscape that they were trying to get across. 9 weeks in the USA at number 1, and one of the fastest sellers in UK history, and way over 20 million copies sold to date, and 23 on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, and countless accolades aside. And so that's my U2 top 10. So what of U2 outside of this top 10? Well, I think the only other essential U2 purchase outside of this is Under a Blood Red Sky, the live EP they released just after the Unforgettable Fire, and that I think has done as much as anything to cement, or did as much as anything at the time, to take U2 to that next level of world dominating bands. They made 4 more studio albums after this, but none of them really caught the public's attention. And I have theories about that. I think it's fair to say that whilst I would never put it past them to release another great single or even another, really good album, I think times have changed. I think the record buying public has changed since their heyday. And I think it's a change that the band themselves are partly responsible for, because very famously, they dumped one of their albums, Songs of Innocence, free to all Apple users. So millions of Apple users around the world, whether they wanted it or not, were given this record for free. And I think that really has helped contribute to the growing popular opinion that music itself has no intrinsic value as a commodity. something borne out by annual streaming figures and purchasing figures. But I suppose, look, that's an argument for another time. Um, if you are new to U2, then I think, as usual, it's pretty much the top 5 albums here are worth investigating, and probably the top 2 are absolutely essential, probably for any rock lover, not just somebody looking to get U2's best albums. But that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on U2 and where you rank their albums, if you think any of their later albums deserve a place in this list. And we can talk about it below. But I will see you again soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.